I'm trying to cover something like 4 million years in 20 minutes, so I will abridge and I will abbreviate, so if I miss any details out, that's why I'm doing it. I'm fascinated by this subject, always have been, okay, and I think that one of the things that drew me to biology was that it tries to answer the big questions, okay? I mean, there's no bigger question than where we come from. Okay, and some people do answer that through faith and through different ways of thinking. But for me, it was like, well, what was here before me? Where do I, as a human, where have I come from? And I find that fascinating. I've done the whole 23andMe genetic analysis kind of thing to find out where my genes have come from more recently. I find that whole big question interesting. But this is a much bigger scale. You know, where do humans come from? And we're going to uncover some kind of cool things, I think. On the way. So firstly, let's meet the family, if you like. Let's meet who we are. We are apes, okay, and that's not insulting anyone in the room, that's just biologically what you and I are. And what are apes? Well, they're large animals with good binocular vision, eyes facing forward, good colour vision, grasping hands and fingers. And in that category, that puts us with chimpanzees, orangutans, bonobos, gorillas. Okay? In a slightly different category, we've got gibbons. And if you look at our wider family, the kind of strange cousins you only see at weddings, then you've got the monkeys and lemurs and so on as well. So all of that lot, that's our family, that's the primate group. Okay? As I say, what makes us primates is that amazing colour vision. We're mostly herbivorous on the whole, and we've got these grasping hands and tools and tool-making hands that we're going to find a little bit later on. Okay, if you look at that timeline, though, you can see that clearly, you can see the dates. Primates have been around on the planet since about 55 million years ago. Now, if you just give a bit of context here, the Earth's about 4 billion years, 4,000 million years. Okay, for the first half of that, there's no living things on the planet at all. So, first life, unicellular kind of stuff, that appears about 2 billion years ago. Okay? There's nothing that you or I would recognise as a living thing on the planet until really about 600 or 700 million years ago. Okay? Then we're getting all the way up to relatively recent times, 250 million years ago, when the dinosaurs first appeared. Okay? They die out with that meteor that's quite famous near Mexico. They die out around 65 million years ago. And because at that great extinction, when 75% of the species on Earth were wiped out, that created a gap in the market for mammals. Okay, and mammals at that point took over in a big way, and that's where you can trace the origins of our primate ancestors for about 55 million years ago. If you look much more recently over on the right-hand side, you'll see that our last branch that leads up to humans there separated about 4 million years. Okay, one of the questions you sometimes get asked, or one of the misconceptions you hear on this is, so is it true that humans evolved from chimpanzees? Do you really believe that? And actually, no, I don't believe that, because if we had evolved from chimpanzees, they wouldn't be here. They would all be us. Okay? We haven't evolved from chimpanzees. A chimp is just as much a modern evolved species as you are. Okay? They have survived and thrived and adapted to the environment they've got up to the modern day, just like a human being has. Okay? But our last common ancestor, that fork in the road that sends chimps one way and sends humans the other way, that happens about 4 million years ago. And it's that zone, that last little bit, that last road, that I want to look into a little bit more today. Okay? What happened along that road? Okay, so we're going to move in and just think, well, for us, for our species, that is quite precisely our home. Ethiopia is where we first see the first signs in the fossil record of humans, or something that will at some point become humans, hominins, if we use the technical word. That's where we see fossils in the ground that are definitely not them and a bit more us. Okay, that's where we find those finds, and that's happening around 4 million years ago or so. Okay, and that fossil is Lucy. Okay, Lucy is absolutely one of the most important fossil finds. So the story goes that in the 1960s, Louis Leakey, who was a very famous paleontologist, is on a dig in that part of the world, and it's the 1960s, so the radio's on in the background and the Beatles are all over the place. And according to legend, anyway, I don't know if this is true, but Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is being played on the radio at the time, just as somebody has the eureka moment of finding a jawbone that is unlike anything that anyone's ever seen before. Okay? And if your business is human or hominid bones, you'll suddenly realise that, oh gosh, this one's a little bit different. Okay? And that's why many more bones have been found of Australopithecus afarensis, which is what you're looking at there. Many more bones. There's actually a really good fossil record for that species. And if we just zoom in a little bit, that is our best current reconstruction of what they looked like. I want to say she, just because they were given the name Lucy. We'll assume they were about 50-50 of each. But that's what Lucy would have looked like. Okay? And I think, I don't know, you make your own call when you're looking at that. If you're looking at that picture, is that an ape or is that a human? Okay? And I'm going to encourage you to do that as we go along the journey, because at some point we're going to cross a line, and it might be a different line for each of you as you're looking at those pictures as we go. Okay? But that's Lucy. How do we know that she looked like that? I just want to go on a little side tangent for a moment and look at the techniques. And the techniques we get from how do we reconstruct from a bit of bone up to a picture reconstruction like that is the same as is used in forensics. There's a team at the University of Manchester that are particularly skilled at this, and looking at the bone and building up the tissue layers that you get on different parts of bone, and then working out the musculature that sits on top of that and so on. So we might only have fragments of bones, but we can quite reliably make reconstructions of what we think these creatures, and now I've got a better word for that, you decide, look like. Okay, so that's Australopithecus. Now Australopithecus is all over Africa. Okay, it's a quite diverse bunch. There's some that moved out of southern Africa to modern day South Africa, and we find a whole bunch of different species living there. We find more in northern or sub-Saharan Africa, and we think that the ones that went down to southern Africa, or called them robust Australopithecines, they're a kind of evolutionary dead end. We don't know what happened to them, but they just vanish and they don't turn into us. Okay, but there's the branch that we come from is Lucy's branch. And eventually, you can see I've jumped a little bit, apologies for the gap, but we're now only 2 million years ago. Okay? And we're meeting the first member of what we would call a Homo genus, okay, which we encountered in economics earlier on. But this is the genus of man in the broader sense. Okay? And Homo habilis is defined by the fact that every time you find a Homo habilis find, you find bits of stone tools with them. Habilis refers to, they're called handyman. Okay? So Australopithecus isn't using tools particularly. If he is, there's no trace of them. Maybe in the same way that chimpanzees are using tools to go fishing for termites and so on, but nothing that's lasting. Whereas Homo habilis is a prolific tool user with flints and all sorts of different tools that he's got there. Okay, so Homo habilis is living in Africa at this particular time, around 1.8 million years ago. Okay, and again, I'm inviting you to have a think. What is that? Do I call that an ancient person? Do I call that an ape? Have we crossed the line, do you think? Up to you to decide that. Okay, but we have a look. There's another one. This always gets a snigger when you teach this. I don't know why Homo erectus makes people snigger, but it makes some people snigger. But Homo erectus is a very, very widespread species. Now, Homo erectus is given that name because it's the first of our species that is genuinely comfortable and permanently walking around on 2 feet. Okay, you can tell that from the hip shape, from the bone length, from the leg bones. And Homo erectus is a traveller. He's using those 2 feet to get around all over. And it's a highly successful species. I've got a map coming up soon to see how far Homo erectus gets around. And it's around for a long time. And one thing that I discovered as I was researching this one that's a little bit of a change from what I understood previously, and that's the joy of science, isn't it? That it changes all the time, that you discover something new and you've got new analyses and new interpretations. That's a report from Nature that if we cut through this, the key bit there is that these 2 early species were living broadly sympatrically in the same lake basin. This blows my mind. You've got these 2 different species, 2 species of human. Yeah, remember, there's nothing like a human. We don't have other species of human. Okay. But then there were 2 distinct different species of human Just like you get different species of lots of different things, but there were two distinct species of human living in the same place at the same time for about 500,000 years and seemingly getting on with each other. Okay? That to me is quite remarkable. Okay? So it challenges that idea that habilis evolved into erectus, evolved into us. It actually said, actually, there are different things going on here. These guys were kind of getting on and living together in more or less the same place, which is quite cool. Anyway, I said Homo erectus travels. Okay, so they are the first species to really get around the world. Okay, and that map, I'm not expecting you to read all the names of the different sites, but hopefully you can see that all over the world we're finding fossil remains of Homo erectus. Okay, they're getting as far as modern day Indonesia, lots in China, lots in Europe. So this is a species that's really well travelled. Okay, and again, over the period of time that we're looking that Homo erectus is around, we're starting to see in different parts of the world different forms evolving from that. So I'm going to introduce you to, well, actually before we do that, looking at this, it's a kind of map of how we think 2 million years ago Homo erectus leaves Africa for the first time. Well, some of them do, of course, many of them remain in Africa, but some of them leave Africa and are travelling all over the world. And the thinking, spoiler alert maybe, was that the ones that ended up going towards Europe and Central Asia evolved into the Neanderthals and into us, if you like, and the ones that went east evolved into modern day humans in different parts of the world, and maybe that was the origin of our species directly. Okay, and that was certainly the thinking that our species evolved from these Homo erectus that have travelled all over the world. Okay, certainly that's what I was taught at university. So to introduce you to some of these, again, have that little look at that Homo neanderthalensis, okay, Neanderthal man. Okay, Neanderthal is a valley in Germany where that first fossil was uncovered. Now, Neanderthals need better PR because, you know, they're almost a byword nowadays for somebody that's just a little bit struggling. Okay, you know, they were supremely well adapted. They were thriving during some of the ice ages. You know, there were many ice ages and periods of cold and warm, and Neanderthals were really good at that. They were shorter. They were, you know, probably not be much taller than 5'7". Okay, stockier build, stronger build. I wouldn't want to arm wrestle one. Okay, but you look at that reconstruction. Give them a shave, put them in a suit, put them in a school uniform. It's not a million miles from us. Okay? They might look a little bit odd, quite pronounced brow ridges, if you like, head shape slightly different. Okay? They're not modern day humans. Okay? But they're pretty close. Okay? We're getting closer to what makes us, perhaps. Okay? Just to give you an example, I'll talk about my skulls in just a moment, but just so you can see, there's the rough range of where we think Neanderthals were living, and you can see, I mean, we're splitting hairs a little bit here, but that skull of a Neanderthal on the left isn't the same as the skull of a modern day human. The brain case is slightly different, the dentition, the teeth are slightly different, the shape of the forehead is slightly different as well. Okay, so it's not a modern day human, but it's getting pretty close. Okay, so that's Neanderthals, well known from the fossil record. Much less well known from the fossil record are Denisovans. Okay, now this is a species that we only know, and amazing that we can get pictures like this really, because we only know it from a couple of teeth and a couple of finger bones. Okay, so there's a bit of extrapolation going on here to create a nice picture of what they look like. There's a little bit of guesswork, but not as much guesswork as you would think. Okay, we know that those teeth are highly useful to paleontologists because, unlike most aspects of our body, which are subject to the influence of the environment, our teeth aren't really affected by the environment. They're kind of, we've got the teeth we've got because of the genes we've got, because of the species we are. So actually, tooth shape and structure is a really useful defining thing to look for when you're looking at whether something is one species or another. Okay? So Denisovans living in China. Look at the dates there, so that's kind of relatively modern times. Okay? And we think that they evolved from Homo erectus that were living in that part of the world. And the genius, I guess, of modern technology is, and I've got my year 13s here as well to pick this up. What they've done is extracted DNA from those bones, okay, PCR'd them, we'll test you on that tomorrow, PCR'd those, okay, and then looked at which genes in that genome had been expressed. Okay, in other words, most of the genes that you've got in your bodies aren't used most of the time, but the ones that keep you alive are. Okay? If you can work out which genes have been expressed, you can kind of roughly work out what that picture would have looked like. Okay? So from an analysis of the DNA and the expression of the genes in those finger bones from 52,000 years ago, you can kind of reconstruct what that person, Denisovan, would have looked like. So it is a bit of a guess, but it's not a complete stab in the dark. Okay? So anyway, they're living in modern-day China and Southeast Asia around that kind of time. My personal favourite, most people's favourites, are Homo floresiensis. Okay? These guys are living on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Now, they were discovered relatively recently, about the same time as Peter Jackson was making his movies of Lord of the Rings. So hobbits were very much in the public consciousness at this point. But absolutely true to say, I measured myself. I've got a son who's, some of you will know, he's in year 2, and I measured him the other day. He's exactly 4 foot tall, okay? Which would have meant he is taller than an adult floresiensis, okay? They did not grow taller than 3'6", okay? So they were little people, okay? Little people, okay? You can tell whether it's a child's bone or an adult's bone because the bones look very, very different. So these are adult Homo floresiensis living on the island of Flores in modern-day Indonesia, and they are about half the height, give or take, maybe a little bit more, but they're little people living there. And we actually find that in biology a few times. My ancestry personally takes me back to Malta, and Malta used to have a species of elephant that was a pygmy elephant. Okay, and we find quite often in biology that islands evolve miniature forms of other animals. Okay, so actually floresiensis, these hobbits, if you like, they would have been perfectly well adapted to the relatively scarce resources on a small island. And if you've got a smaller body, it requires less energy and less fuel, and that's a perfect adaptation to living on a small island. So these guys were living around there at the time. So we've got this picture that I'm trying to paint that during this phase, and I'm saying if we got in a time machine and went back 100,000 years, we'd have had at least 4 or 5 different species of human being, or relatives, living on the planet at the same time. Okay? And again, from our perspective nowadays, where, as I say, there's nothing much like a human, and we kind of think of ourselves as being different and special, which is fine, because I'm sure we are. But that's quite an unusual thing for us to get our heads around, that there are plenty of other things that are quite a lot like us. Okay? But a bit of a change to our thinking happened with the advent of better genetic analyses. So we used to think that our species left Africa 2 million years ago and all the things that I've just told you happened. And, I'm about to tell you I told you a pack of lies because that didn't happen. Okay? You may be familiar with the story of Eve, the origins and the creation story of Genesis, the first human, the mother of all humans. Okay? Well, there is such a concept in biology as mitochondrial Eve. Okay? You all have mitochondria in your cells, and the students in here can definitely tell me what they do. Okay? But mitochondria are, as every student knows, the powerhouse of the cell. Okay? And that's where you get your energy from. Okay? What most people don't appreciate is all your DNA, all your genetics, that lives in your nucleus of your cells mostly, apart from a little bit of it that lives in your mitochondria. Okay? And your mitochondria, you all inherited it from your mothers. You didn't get any of it from your dads. Okay? My kids are lovely, but they ain't got any of my mitochondrial DNA. Okay? Which means that you can trace female ancestry going all the way back by having a look at patterns of mutation within the DNA of the mitochondria. And so you can take mitochondria from people from all over the world, from Aboriginal Australians, from Native Americans, from everywhere else in the world, and you can realise that actually we can trace back all humanity, every single living human being on the planet, to one particular person. Okay? We are all family, we are all related. It's the best anti-racism argument I've ever heard in my life. Okay? But we are all related to this one woman who lived in Africa somewhere around 140 to 200,000 years ago. Okay? So all that stuff I'm telling you about humans having spread out of Africa 2 million years ago, that is all true, but we aren't descended from any of them. Okay? We're descended from Eve, mitochondrial Eve, who lived in Africa much, much, much more recently than that. Okay? And that makes sense because when you look at the amount of genetic diversity there is amongst all humans on the planet, it's too little. We're very good at spotting differences between people, but actually genetically, there's greater genetic diversity in chimpanzees than there is in humans. Okay? We're all far more alike to each other than sometimes we are. Okay? And that lack of diversity is now well explained by the fact that actually we all diverged from each other much, much more recently than we previously thought. Okay? So that changes our story a little bit. I mentioned before that I did my own genetic analysis on my own family history. It told me that my maternal DNA, my mitochondrial DNA haplotype, I'm type X, according to that map. So you can actually trace human migration around the planet by looking at mutations that are present in certain people's mitochondrial DNA. And we all belong to a particular tribe, if you like. And there are 7 major mutation groups of mitochondrial DNA. We all belong to one of them. And probably, making assumptions, you're more likely to be an X if you live in this part of the world. But that depends where your genes come from. Okay? So, yeah, we are all much more alike, and that's because we left Africa much more recently. Okay, so that's led to the Out of Africa 2 hypothesis. So our ancestors left Africa about 2 million years ago, but our direct ancestors left it much more recently, and via a different route, because they now think whereas Homo erectus left via what's now Egypt and Sinai and into the Middle East that way, we think that actually our ancestors left Africa via the Horn of Africa through to what's now Yemen, Oman, and up through the Gulf that way, and that's where we think our ancestors directly moved out from. Okay, I haven't mentioned much about Homo sapiens, us, ourselves. I mentioned that every time we find Homo habilis, we find tools. I mentioned that Homo erectus is the great traveller. Okay, the way you identify a fossil site, whether it's Homo sapiens, is whether there is culture. Okay, the defining feature of us is what do we make. And pretty much as soon as you see Homo sapiens arriving, you find painting, you find art. Okay? You find cave paintings, and you find tools, and you find things that we've made. Okay? It's one of the defining features of what it is to be a modern human. Okay? So there you can see in Indonesia, 40,000 years ago, the first, or one of the very, very first cave paintings that you'll find. I'll come over to my skulls now. This is a model of Cro-Magnon. Okay, it's a very faithful, accurate reconstruction of Cro-Magnon. Now, Cro-Magnon, as you can see, that's a depiction of what he would have looked like. Okay, 35,000 years old. Quite a long time ago if you come to study history. It's quite yesterday if you study paleontology. But you know, whoever this chap was, okay, is one of the earliest humans, one of the earliest one of us. I've asked you all the way through to decide whether that's them or us. This one is definitely us. Okay? If I could get into a time machine, go back 35,000 years ago, go to a Cro-Magnon settlement, kidnap one of their kids, bring it back to modern day, put it in a Joe's uniform, send it to school, it would be unrecognisable. It would be doing its GCSEs and A-levels and doing its homework or not, but it would be one of you, and you would not be able to tell the difference. This is a human, if you like, in our very modern sense of it, and it's 35,000 years old. Okay? This is a real skull of a real human modern day. Okay? So if you take a look, and you're welcome to come and have a look at these a little bit later if you'd like to, and try and spot the difference, you'll struggle to. You won't be able to. Okay? So that's kind of how we know we've arrived at today, because what we've got there are two skulls that are basically the same. Okay? So that nearly completes our story. There's a bit of a sad coda, if you like, to this one. Okay? What happened to the hobbits? What happened to the Denisovans, to the Neanderthals? And without that time machine, I can't really tell you for sure. I know that to an extent, when our Homo sapiens ancestors encountered Neanderthals, that they would have interbred, they would have mated, okay? Because we've all got a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in us. Apparently I'm about 2% Neanderthal, which is slightly less than average, okay? So you will embrace your inner Neanderthal perhaps. But we do know that as soon as Homo sapiens arrives in a particular area, the other types of humans that were living in the area vanished from the fossil record. Okay, which is fairly sad news, I suspect. Okay, I don't think meetings between us and Neanderthals were always that happy. Okay, they were sometimes, but they weren't always. Okay, I think as soon as Homo sapiens arrived in modern-day Indonesia, the hobbits vanished from the fossil record fairly quickly. Okay, we don't know enough about Denisovans to know for sure what happened there, but I'll leave you to fill in the gaps. I think we can predict. Okay, so either way, 12,000 years ago is that time when the last hominin, if you like, the other species of humans that are not us, vanished from the fossil record, and at that point we are alone, and we are the only species of human left on the planet. Okay? Thank you for listening. That's where we'll wrap it up. Okay? I also played with AI, by the way, and got AI to generate me a picture of a Neanderthal playing rugby. I reckon they'd be quite useful. But there we go. That's an AI of a Neanderthal St John's rugby player, if you like. No offence meant. So we will leave it there. Okay, thank you very much.